much, Mark, for inviting me to this session. And thank you everyone for being here. I have to say that it's a bit intimidating doing a presentation on how to do presentations because I know I may not be the best person at doing this at all, but I do have some, experiences, and I can remember, amongst other things, one of my very first presentations at a conference. And what had happened is that I had my paper accepted on the basis of an abstract, which was 5 lines long, and which didn't say very much. And it was accepted. And 4 months later, I really hadn't done the research that I had promised in the abstract. And I had to do this presentation 10 minutes, and it seemed so long, 10 minutes. How on earth was I ever going to be able to have anything to say? I was completely terrified. I think I practiced the presentation, verbatim in my hotel room for an entire day. And nothing bad happened at all. Everybody thought it was okay. And I realized that, well, this is not quite as intimidating as it seems, but I don't know if any of you have had that experience, but there is this risk when you submit this abstract that maybe it'll be accepted and maybe you won't be ready. And that can be a rather uncomfortable experience. But actually, over time, you get so that you don't feel that way about it. I no longer practice my presentations out loud, and certainly not for an entire day. So it gets better. I have a PowerPoint, and I've included in that some of the questions that you submitted, and so we'll get to those as we go along. And I'm not even sure exactly how long this will take, but when we reach the end, well, we continue with questions. So just let me open this, see if I can do that. Right. Hopefully, I can do it without losing access to you. So you can see it now?
Yes, we can.
Yes. Okay. Let's see if I can. Okay, so we'll go ahead. So you'll see when I am doing this presentation that there are quite a few pictures, and most of those pictures come from the EGOS conference, the European Group for Organization Studies, that I was part of the organization of in Montreal. And we had a wonderful photographer who took all these pictures of the conference, so that you can see a scene from the EGOS conference in Montreal in 2013 on that slide, and I'll show you some more as well, because it gives you kind of an atmosphere of what it's like to be at a conference. And so I'm going to, I put this title, Comment présenter une communication scientifique, which was what I was invited to talk about. As I say, I think we've all given presentations in our lives, so you may have more expertise on some aspects than me, and so I don't pretend to be haven't done research on communications, but this is my some ideas from my experience. So here's an outline of the things I wanted us to talk about. First of all, why present at a conference? Second, we talk about different conference formats and the implications that might have for how you present. We'll talk about content questions. So several of you are asking, well, what should I put the emphasis on? How should I make the slides? And then a related question is about timing. How am I going to fit this into the limited time that I may have, sometimes as little as 5 minutes. So we're going to address those questions. We're going to talk about the notion of feedback during conferences. I put a line which is performance. What I mean by that is there's the preparation of the slides before you get to the conference and everything you do beforehand, but then there is the actual doing of it in real time, the performing. And so we're going to focus a little bit on that aspect of it as well. And then I will talk just briefly about beyond the presentation. And here I was hoping that we could do this a bit interactively. So I'm not the best user of Zoom, having retired just before everyone transferred to Zoom, but let's see if I can do this. So I have a slide here, which I'm gonna just move to a format where I can actually write on the slide. And I'd like to ask you, you know, why are you presenting? What attracts you about presenting, and what worries you about it? So anybody who has anything to suggest, please. You can raise your hands, or you can just talk. Oh, I can see a hand. So Megan.
What I love about the opportunity to present is it gives me a deadline to just get it done. So I really struggle with presentations, but I really force myself to submit to things anyway, just so that it'll get done.
And is there anything worries you about them?
Oh, everything. I don't do great. I'm still learning how to do really good PowerPoint. So my PowerPoints look like just garbage. And I tend to get a little, I speak too fast while I'm presenting, comes out jumbled. I'm just not very good at it. So that worries me. Yeah, garbage PowerPoint is so correct.
Working too fast.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, Jack.
Yeah, so I think what attracts me is the fact that I have an opportunity to get feedback, good or bad, right? Because any feedback is really good feedback, I guess. If people feel you're going in a wrong direction, I've had the experience where they might say, well, I don't think this is the correct framing. Maybe you should think about this. Then you have more work to do after, but at least, you know, you're on a better direction. And I think what worries me is, and I've had this didn't happen to me, but the presenter right before me, they had a lot of technical difficulties. The screen behind them went out, mic stopped working, and it just kind of they went off track. Like the presentation went off the rails after that. And I felt really bad for the individual, but I think that's a reality that could happen, and you just have to prepare for the fact that, you know, the screen might go out, might stop working, so be prepared for that.
Yeah, that can be really difficult if you can't you can't show your PowerPoint. To have to do that in real time is quite challenging indeed. Marc-Antoine.
Okay, I was mute. Yeah, so I think what's interesting about the presentation is that forces you to summarize your ideas, and also in a different format, because you of course you have to summarize your idea at some points into an abstract, but the presentation is another format, so it's different. So, and it's a other type of visual, so it forces to build your ideas differently. So, and it may help you to build a better paper after that. But yeah, what worries me is related to that. So it's so difficult, I think, to sum up all your ideas into a 10-minute presentation or a 5-minute presentation. I always struggle. I always find it difficult to manage time. So yeah.
Okay, right. Anyone else? Please. is okay. Well, let's work with what we
Oh, wait,
have.
I have one more for what worries
Yes.
me. Presenting after like a really good presentation, like you're following a rock star, and then it's yours.
Okay. Yeah. So I mean, in the positive things, I really agree with that idea about forces synthesis, and that's one of the reasons I think that, and the deadline issue. I really feel that is so helpful. It does help us move forward to have that deadline. And it also helps because you know that you've got to give this thing in a very short time period, and suddenly it concentrates the mind enormously. And I have always found that to be a moment of great creativity, where suddenly you see what it is that you can say, and it distills your ideas. So I agree absolutely with that. And of course, we all go to conferences to get feedback.
There's also two others worries in the chat. So Maryse is saying that she worries about presenting in front of important person. So for example, the presentation in front of Ann Langley, you might be a little stressed. And the other is answering the question after the presentation.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, those are important ones. And that kind of relates to what I was going to say about getting feedback. So we say we want feedback, but do we really want feedback? I mean, I was telling you this story about me not having anything to say in this conference, and I was just so worried about the feedback. And so it's a kind of a mixed thing. And the important people in the audience and answering questions, that suggests that at some point we want feedback, but we don't, right? I mean, I have found myself thinking before certain conferences, oh, I hope nobody is there. Because I'm scared of what they'll think of me. There's an identity element to doing a presentation when you want to feel in control, and you want people to like what you're saying, and you're not sure, you have doubts about the quality of what you're doing, and so there's this kind of hesitation to accept feedback. But of course we need to get over that, because we do that. The real reason for doing this is to get the feedback, to get help. So that's going to be one of the themes that I'd like to talk about. Let me just see if there's any more chat points there. Yeah, sometimes receiving bad critiques. Yeah, presenting in English, right? Yeah. Okay. Well, so that kind of sets the scene for some of the issues, and don't hesitate to come back to me if we don't address them properly. But I wanted to sort of raise that and put it out there that we want feedback, but we don't. And one strategy for not having feedback is to go over your time, so there's no time for questions. If you're afraid of questions, then make sure there's no time for questions. So we shouldn't be doing that, but there's this sort of temptation that you might do that. Okay. All right. So let's move on to the next slide. Now, just a minute, I will. Okay. Close this down here. Okay. Yeah, I present for I am. It's an identity thing, and that's a little bit the problem with it. So I also wanted to talk about different conference formats, because it can make a huge difference on how, what it feels like to present. So I don't know what your experience is, but I mean, the kind of classic kind of conference, I call it the cafeteria style. A typical example of that, and I know you're from very different fields, so you may not relate to what I'm going to say here, but the Academy of Management is the kind of classic cafeteria style conference, which receives 10,000 people every year, at least, if not more. And there are so many parallel sessions that you can't keep track of it. And the paper sessions are assigned by organizers that you don't know and with people that you don't know. So you end up in a paper session with a bunch of other people that you don't know, and you don't have any kind of reference points really for what is required in that session. Sometimes in these cafeteria sessions, it may be slightly more friendly if you have a symposium, for example. So a symposium session at the Academy of Management is where a little group of people have got together and decided to do presentations together, and so that they have a little conversation going between them that makes it a little bit more friendly. And that you're not going to be in a situation where the other presenters are going to be necessarily attacking you. You're all working in the same direction. So those sessions are possibly the hardest to manage. And the other issue that tends to happen with these big conferences is that the audience, you've got a beautiful picture here with a huge audience, that's very rare. Unless you get in the session with a famous person and you happen to be a presenter in the same session as a famous person, there may be 4 people in the room. So that also creates sort of a very strange environment. Large hotels tends to be formal. And it's a bit lonely there sometimes. So I'm not sure that this is the best place to start, but it is. These are fantastic conferences. They are very rich. Everybody who is in your field is going to be there. You will be able to go to really interesting presentations, but the part where you're presenting may be a little bit less interesting, and you may not get the best feedback either in one of these settings. So that's the cafeteria style conference. And then there's the community conference, what I call the community style conference. And these may be, just small conferences. Or another example of this is the European Group for Organizational Studies, which I usually attend or sometimes attend. And the way this is organized, it's organized by track or streams, and people stick with their group over 3 days. And so you will be maybe 20, 30 people all together for 3 days with 7 sessions. That's what happens at the Group for Organizational Studies. There may also be roundtable formats. And you can be a lot more informal with these sessions. They are probably less intimidating than the big conferences, more friendly. more open to giving and receiving feedback. I sometimes think that there are two types of conferences. There are conferences where people go to speak and conferences where people go to listen. And the Academy of Management is where people go mostly to speak. They go to speak, but they don't necessarily listen. EGOS is a conference where people go to speak, but they also go to listen, and they go to learn, and they go to work together in a group on a topic. And so I think these are much more congenial places to start your career if you're going to be presenting. You will probably get a little more time to present as well. For example, at EGOS, you probably get at least 20 minutes, 15 to 20 minutes at least, with some time for discussion as well. So you'll be able to do a much better job of presenting your work. And the other interesting feature of EGOS also is it is genuinely international. That is, that people come from many, many different countries, definitely are not all, don't all master English by any means. And so you can feel more comfortable if that is one of the issues that is being raised for you. Within that, and sometimes at the Academy of Management as well, there is the round table format. That's not the round table format. Well, you could, I have this slide because it shows the real difference between, you know, the big formal room in the hotel, the Academy of Management thing, and the EGOS conference, where the guy can sit on the corner of a table and just relax and give his presentation. It's not at all the same kind of performance style that you will see there. Some people might try that at the Academy of Management, but it's less frequent. And then there's the round table. And when you get accepted for a conference, sometimes they will say, well, you're accepted, but it's going to be a round table. And how do you feel when you get that? Anybody, how do you feel when you get accepted for a conference, but they tell you that it's not going to be in the session, it's going to be in a round table? Yeah, so Megan.
Well, it's a bit different because I knew I was signing up for a workshop, but for 2 days I'll be with the same group of 4 people, and I'm so excited, like, just to get all that help and feedback and discussion about a piece of work. Like, I'm confident my work's going to be completely different because of the small format. But again, it's a workshop, not a conference.
Yeah. Anyone else?
And could you explain, because I'm not sure everyone is familiar with that, but could you explain the difference between a session and a round table?
Yeah, so in a session, you would have maybe 4 presenters over a 90-minute time period who would have a certain amount of assigned time to present in front of an audience that could range from 10 people to 20 to 30, so a big audience. And then there would be time to present and a time to for questions and answers on each presentation. That's typically what happens. A round table, on the other hand, if it's done properly, would be a certain number of people, maybe 4 people who are whose papers are going to be discussed, not necessarily presented in detail, however, discussed. And usually what happens is each person will have read or will have been asked to read all the papers. Usually there is a little segment where you do a presentation, but it'll be informal, no PowerPoints. And so what I usually do for a roundtable session, I recommend for everyone, is to put it on one slide. Just create one PowerPoint slide just to make copies of it, paper copies of it, circulate it to everyone in the table, and use that to talk through for 5 minutes your paper. That's all you need. Normally it should have a research question on it and a picture of some that kind of shows what you're doing. That gives a summary basically of what it is that your paper is about, enough so that you can just talk it through. And I find that so helpful. And in fact, you know, if you want to present somebody else's paper, let's say you want to present somebody else's paper that is published in a journal, you do it on one slide with the research question and a diagram or a table from the paper, and you have all you need to kind of talk through a paper. And of course, the advantage of the roundtable format is that you're likely to get much better feedback. So if your purpose really is to get feedback, honestly, this is the absolute best format that you can think of. And so the reason I kind of brought up, there's a sort of a tension here, because when you submit a paper to a conference, you may get the feeling that you got shunted off to a round table because they thought your paper was not good enough to be presented before a larger audience. But I don't think you should take it that way. So for example, at the Academy of Management, they have two formats. I think one is called a division paper and one is called a discussion paper. And the discussion paper is more of a roundtable format, supposedly, although in practice, I'm not sure how different it is, but it's supposed to be a roundtable format. And, but it's given less status, let's say. However, it's a much more useful format for feedback. And it's less demanding in terms of the performance that you deliver, but more demanding in terms of the input that you'll be giving to others in the conference, and the kind of effort you will be putting in to explain and exchange with people about your work. So the different formats make a difference. That's the main thought that I wanted to put before you. Yeah, and then there's the video conference, which we have had a little bit too much of in the last couple of years. They tend to be a little bit more formal, but there are ways to innovate in doing that. I'm not the best person in doing Zoom kind of fancy things with breakout rooms and special software and so on, but there are opportunities to do that. I think one of the things that is important with video conferences is that because when you're speaking, as I am now, I can't see everyone. And so it's important to stop from time to time and as I'm doing, and sort of get some feedback, get some discussion going. So I don't know whether any of you would like to make some comments on these different formats or ask anything about them, or give some of your experience in these different kinds of activities. I'm going to stop sharing so I can see you. I have Aliaresa.
Hi.
Yes.
Yes, I have a question, and my question is that, what is the criteria of conference organizers, let's say AOM, to put some papers on division section and some of them in discussion? Does it really mean that if your paper is in discussion section, it really is the weaker one, or there is something other things behind this process of decision making?
I think what most of the divisions do is, at the Academy of Management, for example, is that they put the papers that were rated less highly in those sessions. But it is possible for reviewers of those papers, to suggest that this particular paper would fit better in a discussion section. So reviewers get asked to pinpoint which articles would fit better in a discussion section. And I think that they put them there because they think it's worth, discussing, that there is openings there to move the paper forward. But it is a sort of an indicator of quality. But I would not take it badly, because I think that it's a real opportunity, honestly, to get some good feedback and to discuss with others. And usually, well, it depends on the divisions at the Academy of Management. But when I was a division head, I tried to put chair people who, had names and who are quite well known, so that you had a discussion between the four of you, but also the chair of the session could give some really constructive feedback, because they have a little bit more experience. So that's another advantage of it. Megan, you had a comment.
How important is it to have an AOM attendance on your resume before hitting the job market? Does it matter? Is it like a box you have to check, or if you've been to EGOS or like?
Yeah, these are all good things to have on your CV, and it's not a difficult thing to get onto your CV. So I think you should definitely do that. Publications count more, but yes, go to conferences, take the opportunity.
But like if like, let's say you went to EGOS a couple of years in a row, but you've never been to AOM, does that matter?
Well, it depends where you're applying.
Okay.
Yeah. It wouldn't matter to me, but yeah, so it would matter if you're applying in the States. Definitely would. Maryse had her hand up and then she put it down. I don't know if she had something she wanted to say. Maryse?
Oh no, I was just putting a push up for the comment.
Okay. Right. Okay. Anyone else? If not, we'll just move ahead. Okay, let's see. Okay. Okay. So the next theme I wanted to address was content. And I have found this absolutely fantastic cartoon, which I hope you enjoy, from the Journal of Management Inquiry. At one point, the Journal of Management Inquiry had, in every issue, had a cartoon, and this is one of them, and it's kind of very revealing about content, where the presentation is incomprehensible, but that's okay, because we know that the findings are statistically significant. These are some of your questions that I will try and discuss, and we can after I've talked about it for a while, we can have a discussion in between us. So, comment rendre une présentation intéressante? Comment vendre son papier? It probably is not by putting lots of tables of statistics, which nobody understands. So that's probably not a great idea. How much text to put on each slide? I'm still confused about the amount of text on my presentation slides. How can I make an impressive presentation that continues to be talked about among people or remembered? Would a picture or graph that can summarize my research be most effective? So these are how to make your slide presentation. So here are some thoughts from me on those questions, and then we can go back to you and see what questions further questions you might have or suggestions. So let's to start talking about this. Here is a list of the parts of a paper, right? Basically, so we have the introduction, we have the literature review, we have the conceptual framework, the methodology, the findings, and the discussion. So we realize that presentation, we have to make some choices. So according to you, which is the most important of these? Marc-Antoine.
I don't know. I would say the introduction, because you have to make sure why your presentation or your subject is important, and then you catch the attention, and then you can move on to the next section.
Okay. Anyone else?
In the chat, we got Holly, who agrees with Marc-Antoine. We got also Maryse and Kai saying findings and conceptual
framework. Okay.
Discussion.
Okay. Intro, findings, and discussion. Yeah, we seem to agree on this mostly. Would anyone like to kind of comment specifically? What about Marie-Ève? You put these three. Any reason why?
Yes, because I think like we said before, introduction is important to give the context of your paper. And then I think the findings and the discussions is also important, because in the discussion you can say, why should we look more for this subject in the future, and it gives like more context, interesting context for your paper, like what are the consequences for the society, for organizations and everything. So for people that don't understand statistics, I think that this is the most interesting part for the presentation. Okay.
All right. Well, I actually agree with everybody, so this is great. So yeah. So first of all, I agree that the introduction is the most important part, and it's the most important part because the audience has to understand the problem and why it's important. Otherwise, this is not going to work. And the more complex your study is, and the more technically difficult, the more that it's important. And to spend the time that you need to make the audience see that what you are studying is actually an important problem and is far more important than, for example, saying what everyone else has said about it, because you're presenting what you found and not necessarily, unless you're doing a literature review paper, I don't think you should spend too much time on the literature review. And this is one of the things I have seen that people make a mistake with. So they start out the paper, they start out their presentation, okay, they've got the introduction, and then they spend 4 slides on presenting what other people have done on this problem. And by that time, most of the presentation most of the time has gone by, and they have not enough time to really say what they found. And so this is one of the errors that people make. So literature review for me is entirely secondary in a presentation. It's important in a paper, but in a presentation, I would not spend time on it. The second part that I think is important, and we didn't all of us talk about this, and I expect it's It depends on which kind of paper you're doing. The conceptual framework is pretty. Particularly if you're doing a quantitative paper, right? Because this is where you start. In a quantitative paper, you set up your theory up front. And so this is critical. And so we saw that cartoon earlier. It would be much better for that person who was presenting to draw their conceptual framework, to talk over it. You know, the boxes and arrows, and how the different concepts are linked, rather than to present these tables of figures. And you could use that conceptual framework a model slide if you're a quant person to really talk about everything. You can use it to talk about your concepts. You can use it to talk about your measures by going around each of the variables, and you can use it to talk about your findings. And so that for me, this is you know, a really good way to economically present your work. If you're doing a qualitative paper, you might not do that quite so much. And then the findings and the discussion, which I put together, so you have to tell us what is interesting, what you found, and why it's interesting. And so those are very important as well. And you know, I would for a qualitative paper, I would say the introduction, the motivation, one line even, 2 or 3 lines on the methodology. You have to say something about it. You have to say what your data is. You have to say the number of interviews you did. You have to, I wouldn't spend a huge amount of time on talking about exactly how you did the analysis. That is hugely important for a paper. But it's just a boring and distracting part of a presentation. So go directly to the findings, show some quotes, and get people into the. I can see Megan needs to talk.
I'm sorry. A few of the presentations I've been to, when presenters didn't show some of their analysis and how they did their code, they were really questioned and grilled hard.
Really? Yeah.
Like, do you have them on hand just in case for questions, or do you?
Yeah,
Okay.
you have backup slides that you can present. That's a very good point. You should always have some backup slides. But I really do think that in terms of when you've got 10 minutes, you don't want to spend 3 of them on the methods. What you want to do is to show the findings. And in showing the findings, the methods somehow, you know, do appear as well, because you can see the kind of coding categories that were developed. Yeah, so if you jump from the introduction to the model, that may be too quick. You know, there's a model at the end, so you may need some data in between. And I think that audiences appreciate data in limited quantities. We don't want a slide that's, you know, got 15 lines of quote. That won't work. So 4 lines of quotes with the key sentence in bold or in yellow, so that it can be read very easily in the course of the presentation. So for me, those are the key things, and I don't know whether, you know, other people would disagree with that. Youngwon.
Hi, I have a question that sometimes some people in the introduction section, some people say, "Oh, this is my finding." So they just they talking about the research questions and short summary of the findings in the introduction session. Is it an effective way to deliver my research, or just stick to my introduction and my research question in the introduction section, and my findings should suggest at the end of the presentation in the finding section or discussion section,
Yeah.
which is the best way
I
to
mean,
present
that's
my
what
idea.
that's what I would do, except if you don't have much time.
Hmm.
If you don't have much time, it can be tempting to present the introduction, then show a model, or which is kind of your findings, and say, listen, this is what I found, and now I'm going to explain in more detail. And then you've got it out there. You know, it's kind of done. And if you only have a few minutes, that might be a strategy to make sure that the important things get seen. What you don't want is not to reach the findings.
Okay. Then what about in case of the job market seminar or guest speaker seminar, is which lasts like 90 minutes long? So
yeah, I mean, I personally wouldn't put the the model up front, but I have seen people do it. Maybe it becomes motivating sometimes to do it that way. Also, the 90-minute guest seminar is a different beast altogether. You know, we talked about the different conference formats. The 90-minute guest seminar, which is pretty much the same as a job talk seminar, actually, and you're going to have to do the job talk seminar. So the thing about the job talk seminar and sometimes the guest speaker seminar is that even more than for a conference, people jump on you. They're not necessarily going to be polite and wait to the end. So in that case, it may be a strategy to try and get what you want to say out there before the rain starts coming. I mean, I can remember one guest seminar, and I will not mention where it was, but I got stopped on the second slide. And I was a senior professor, so this is it wasn't got stopped on the second slide, and I had to fight to get past the second slide. I kept saying, well, listen, that's coming.
Okay.
And because I was a senior professor, I could say, well, listen, John, shut up a moment, let me get on with it. I could say that. But if you're doing a job talk, you're intimidated. You want to please these people. You're not going to do that. And so this can be something that you need to know and be aware of. So the most challenging and intimidating presentations, I think, are in those circumstances, and it's something to be aware of. I don't think you find that mainly in conferences. People don't have that need to do that kind of thing, and some of it is showing off as well. So, yeah, but that's a good discussion. And then I put this last line at the bottom of the slide, which is something that I think is good to include in a presentation. And I'll come back to that later, which is to list some open questions, to orient the audience. So that when you get feedback, that it's going to be useful feedback. And also you're kind of you're asking for specifics. I would like here's what I'm thinking now, could you help me with this? That kind of orients the discussion, and it can be a good way to end the presentation. All right. So anyone want to add anything on content? Okay, so we talk about timing. Okay, Alaresa.
As you know, for this kind of symposium, many of us submit work in progress or research ideas, which we might not necessarily have findings. In that case, what we should put in our slides.
Well, in that case, I think you need to declare that up front and present as if it was a proposal. So that then you would probably put more emphasis on the conceptual framework and methodology at that point. Yeah, and it could also be a literature review that you're doing. So yeah, and so it depends on the style of the paper. I mean, in some fields, the methodology is the findings. You know, it's kind of the key thing, and so that then you would take this with a pinch of salt and do it differently. But so Mark and then Sonia.
Yeah, I just want to add for the symposium, but I think it's good for the conference. If you paper that you present that is work in progress, maybe focus on the feedback, or at least the section that you really want feedback, especially for the symposium. The professor and the students in the room will be there for you. So definitely the introduction, set the relevance of your paper, the question, but then you could focus on what the section with the question that are bugging you, and like that we will try to help you in this reflection.
Okay, Sonia.
Yes, hello. I was wondering, you mentioned the conceptual framework for the quantitative paper. For a qualitative paper, how would you go about it?
Well, for me, the qualitative paper, the conceptual framework usually kind of emerges more at the end. So I kind of see that as part of the findings and discussion more. You see what I mean?
Yeah, so you would go introduction, a little bit of method, one line, and then straight into your findings in the framework.
Yeah, yeah,
okay.
That's what I would do.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
There's also a question from Kai in the chat. Not sure if how do you present enough without giving too much away? I find often presentators will present their work when their paper are in peer review. So that's the Kai question.
Okay, so Kai, would you like to explain a bit more the question? I mean, do you have a moment to do that?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for sharing thoughts and also exchanging. It's something that I'm picking up more and more as I go to conferences and then see how people present, what they present. And I think this is the case for more mature presentations, where I guess sometimes and then you're also trying to fit your paper in a conversation, but that conversation can be there are multiple ideas and you want to make sure that you share enough, but also you don't want to kind of give the gem away, because I also have heard, you know, people will say, oh, if you want to read the article, it was just published this morning, so go and have a look. So it's like a weird device that people also use, like these presentations, like it's almost like go and read my paper, or it's almost more has a setting the scene for go and reading their paper, or as well.
Yeah, so I'm not sure what I'm picking up from you, but are you sort of suggesting that people might be afraid to fully disclose everything about their work because they think somebody might steal it?
Yeah, that is that could be part of it as well, and it's something that I'm finding it does happen, and it's something that I think as junior researchers is something that's like that I'm picking up more and more. Oh, like it is when you go to conferences, you do exchange ideas, but also sometimes you also want to reserve a bit as well, and it's something that I don't fully know how to navigate. Yeah.
I'm glad you brought this up. I think it's an awkward question, but there is an ethical kind of thing surrounding this, and you know, my personal feeling is that you know, if you have reached a certain point in your study, you're probably way ahead of anybody else, and that it'd be very hard for them to reproduce what you've done, because you've got your data, you've got your analysis, you've got your findings. So I feel uncomfortable that people would hide. That kind of defeats the purpose of the conference, where the idea of the conference is scientific exchange and intellectual discussion. And what we're doing here is kind of pretending to do that, but we're not doing it. And so I feel uncomfortable with it. At the same time, I do understand how you might feel. And, if someone had, if someone has experienced, having their work scooped or something, it could be awkward. There could also be commercial interest sometimes for authors, that they're using their work for consultancy or something, and that there could be reasons not to disclose things. I find that rather unfortunate. Perhaps it's something I don't have all that much experience of as a qualitative researcher. It's very hard to reproduce somebody else's qualitative study. Maybe it's easier with databases and so on. So I don't know if anyone else has thoughts about this, or is something that you'd like to further discuss. But it's an important point to be aware of. And certainly, I mean, also, you don't steal people's work. I mean, that's the other message. If you hear something at a conference, you can learn from it, but you don't immediately go and write a paper about it. If you have an idea which builds on the author's idea, contact them and tell them about it. I mean, that should be your strategy, I think. So no one else wants to jump in on this? Anyone in the chat also? No? Okay. Yeah, Megan.
I am glad that Kai, that you brought up the issue, because it's something that I've been hearing about as well. So right now it's like, if you're advanced enough, you can't be copied, but at the same time we're trying to present maybe before we're ready to get it on the resume. But it's a whole new land. But it's encouraging to just be able to talk about it, even then to
Yeah. I mean, maybe it's a question also of selecting the places where you present. To present, amongst friends, amongst people that you trust. So it might be another thought. Okay, well, I am glad you brought that up, and it was something that I had at the back of my mind when I was preparing this, and you brought it forward immediately. Okay, I will now move on to talking about the timing. So this was a very common question that people had. So how can I present a paper in 5 minutes? That's hard. What should I focus on the most? How can one efficiently manage time and still give a good overview? Sur quel élément puis-je passer rapidement? C'est définitivement la principale question. La limite de temps est importante. So I think, in a sense, I kind of indirectly covered some of those questions by focusing on, which parts of the content I think are more important. So if you really have very little time, the research question and the diagram, in 5 minutes, the research question, justify it with a diagram that shows what you found, is all you can do. I think it was Marc who said at the beginning that he really liked conferences because they force you to synthesize. That 5 minutes is precious from that point of view. I mean, you're going to have to synthesize the whole thing in 5 minutes. Try and find that diagram, which will then clarify for you what your research is about. Not just for everyone else, but for you as well. That can be really helpful in forcing you to do that. So I had a few more things I wanted to say about timing. So these kind of few rules of thumb from my experience, things that I do. So first of all, it's important not to steal other people's time. It is very annoying when the first person in a session takes half an hour when everyone has been given 10 minutes, and it's disrespectful. Of course, the chair of the session should not let that happen, but sometimes they do. And that is really upsetting because then the last person, instead of having 10 minutes, have only 5. So don't steal other people's time. The best bits and don't worry about every detail. So that's the 5-minute presentation. And this has got to be a summary of the paper. You cannot say everything, so just go for the things that really are going to grab the attention of the audience. I kind of have this algorithm, and I don't know that it's perfect, but one slide is 1 minute, right? One slide, 1 minute. Probably it's a bit more than that for me, but I think that that's the general average. And so I kind of work on that basis. I have the number of slides that I think I want. So for a 10-minute presentation, I'll make 10 slides. However, in my back pocket, I'll have the idea, okay, what if I'm going over time? Which one am I going to drop? And I'll skip it in real time. So I think that also is another strategy, to have a little bit of flexibility. Also, practice to see if it's going to fit. Now, I don't do that anymore, which is why I need to have this backup strategy. But if you have practiced your presentation, you will know if it's going to fit. I have this problem that when I practice presentations, I always go wrong on the second slide and have to start all over again, so I never finish it. So I'm too self-critical. But if you can avoid that, and you can, even if you make a mistake or you think you made a mistake in doing the presentation, just keep going. You can practice it. That's helpful. Yeah. Try to get someone to signal to you, hopefully the chair of the session, on half time and at a 2-minute signal, so that then you can roughly estimate where you are with respect to what you have. And in real time, you can make some decisions about what you're going to drop. And think ahead. What will you skip over? So I usually have too much. I usually have too many slides for my findings. They're not all as critical as the rest, and so I have a few that I can just skip, and it's not a big deal. So that's another strategy to manage your time. Yeah. Anyone else have thoughts about time? Thoughts about timing, anyone? Takes discipline and awareness. So somebody has to tell you. Okay, so we carry on. Miguel.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I pressed lots of buttons there trying to find which one was the right one. The question on timing was mine, and it's not really a question, but a comment on the practice. Every time I practice, it fits. But then when I'm doing the presentation itself, I am a lot more nervous, and I'm sweating, and things cross my mind all the time. So I usually it doesn't fit anymore. And
yeah,
then
so I think you need to compensate. You have to say, I need to get it down, you know, to 75% of the time I have, and then it'll be fine.
Yeah, or maybe practice to do it in 4 minutes instead of 5, or 8 minutes
Exactly.
instead of 10.
Yeah. And I know it's a challenge, but I find that having this reserve, you know, being willing to drop something is very important. I mean, I think that's terribly frustrating when you see somebody, they have their presentation and they are determined to present every single slide, regardless of the time. And you kind of think, well, why doesn't the chairman tell them to go to the conclusion? And they keep on doing it, and they can't seem to skip it. It's very important to have that flexibility to be able to say, okay, this is okay. We just move on and skip to the last slide but one, and get it done. So you have to have that kind of real-time ability to manage that. Okay, the next topic I want to talk about was feedback. So I have another great, give you a second or two. Great cartoon from the Journal of Management Inquiry on feedback. We didn't talk about this, but some conferences have discussants. Okay, so the discussant is someone whose role it is to get everybody into a frazzle, almost. And so there, depending on whether this is a discussant who is part of the team, who's been invited as part of the team, or whether it's somebody who is a senior scholar who is commenting on papers, it can be more or less intimidating in terms of the kind of feedback you get. So highly critical feedback can be a little bit disturbing. So this is a question that someone raised. How much do you admit to certain parts being in progress? I think maybe we discussed that already. What kind of feedback should you ask for? And what feedback can you expect? How much motivation and background should you give on the project? I think it's good to think about how you want to encourage and manage the feedback. So I have a few comments on that. So you have to want feedback. This is, this is why you're doing it. So you have to kind of manage it so that you can preserve your ego while receiving feedback, right? This is the thing. So first of all, don't overhype your paper, right? If it looks as though you're kind of saying that you're solving the world and you're not, the reviewers will pick up on that, and they will take the opportunity to tell you so. And so a little bit of humility goes a long way. It kind of removes that temptation to jump on somebody. Admit the weaknesses and the doubts, and motivate the listeners to be honest and constructive. So you can say, I would like feedback on X and Y, and be specific also. You can sort of say at the beginning, I'm willing, I can take any feedback, you want to give me, and make it so that people will not feel tempted to destroy you, but will feel tempted to help you out. And that's what you want. So the other thing to do is to, get some pre-conference feedback from other people so that you can be prepared for it, and make that part of it. There's a guy at INSEAD. His name is Puis-je, and he works on organizational change, and he's part of the organizational development and change division of the Academy of Management. And he has this session he runs every year as part of a kind of a professional development workshop for doctoral students. And he calls it Nasty Friends. Okay. And so the whole purpose of it is to get people used to listening to feedback without being defensive about it. So this all physically organized where the person who's given a presentation gives their presentation, and then they turn to face the PowerPoint slide, so they have their back to the audience. And then people give feedback. Pretty much unrestrained feedback, and the rules are that the author cannot speak. They have to listen. And then at the end of all the feedback, they can make a comment or two, but it's kind of to encourage, to maximize the quantity of constructive feedback. It's called Nasty Friends. You can try it with your friends. It's not a good idea to try this with anybody, but it may be an idea to help really allow people to be honest and not be restrained in doing that, and help you to accept it, that you get this feedback. So I think that this is one of the great challenges of presenting, this need to preserve egos and at the same time receive feedback, and be willing to receive feedback. So anyone like to comment more on this, or any experiences, anything you've seen in conferences on that? Yes, Sonia.
I just want to say, I think this Nasty Friends idea is kind of interesting. I don't know, I haven't seen it in practice, but I'm thinking if I turn my back and they just give me all the feedback, then I could just take it and improve whatever it is that I need to improve. I don't know, I'm thinking it is a good thing rather than a bad thing.
I think it is a good thing, and that it's presented as a good thing, and I think it is a good thing. Yeah, I'm suggesting that's something you could try. You might not want to try it, in a large group where people are not respectful, but it's aimed really at helping people to accept feedback positively, and also to be honest when they are giving feedback, because there's also this kind of, sometimes you want to protect the person too much and don't tell them what they need to hear. So there's that as well, and I think that it's an interesting approach. Maybe if you Google his name, Puis-je, Quyhui, you'll Nasty Friends, you'll see him talk about this, because it's kind of a particular methodology he's developed. Yeah, Megan.
I've noticed two kinds of like responses to feedback. So either the presenter, and like I'm talking a short span of say you have a few minutes to respond to feedback. So they either thank them and say, I was thinking about that, but like they wrap up quickly, essentially thank you, or a whole lot of pushback, which takes up the rest of the discussion period. So I mean, on the one hand, I can see why it's good to kind of, show your chops. No, I thought this through and then, but on the other hand, you don't get feedback. What's the way to?
I mean, I think you have to listen. I think you have to listen. So the instinct, everyone's instinct is to be defensive when you receive criticism, and I think you have to try and accept it. Especially when more than one person is making the comment. Yeah, Also, if you see somebody being unfair with someone else in terms of feedback, you know, you can also intervene and give your opinion if you agree with the author. And I think we should do that too, to ensure that, you know, somebody doesn't get nasty, bad feedback. They may get nasty feedback, but it's good feedback. It's helpful. Yes, Kai.
Yeah, thanks for that last comment too. I find receiving feedback is one thing, and then and I think it is always welcome. It's a shared endeavor. And I also find, like, for myself, it's like, okay, how do I deliver the feedback? And in that part, it's like, yes, you want, and then maybe some things it's better offline, meaning like, oh, you pull the person aside and then kind of have a chat.
Yeah.
But also sometimes it's like, maybe not even ask, like, not give the feedback might be best. You know, like there's this line where like, oh, I'm not the expert in this, but I think this could be interesting, but I'm not sure. At the same time, it's also just like, how do you frame, how do you deliver that feedback so it could be kind of be more accepted? And I think that's a very fine art, and it's not easy as well. And I've seen people often like deprecate, right? To say that, oh,
Yeah.
they're not an expert on this, and then so it's an indirect way of like managing expectations.
Mitigating the feedback, by saying, okay, I'm not really an expert, but it seems to me that. Another way is to say, listen, I really liked X. On the other hand, I thought that Y was a bit problematic. So you at least recognize the positive elements of the work, but then you also show what you find problematic. And most studies do have some positive elements that you can draw attention to, which kind of sweetens the pill a little bit. So that's another strategy that people use. I see that the time is advancing, so Alana.
Hi, sorry, I have kind of a silly question, but so there's always this thing that people do that I always forget to do, and I'm a little bit wondering if it's a faux pas or not. But so many people, when there's a speaker or when someone presented, is like, thank you so much for coming. Thank you for presenting. You know, this made a meaningful contribution or something. There's like 3 sentences that's always like, thank you, thank you, thank you. And then they go in and they ask the question. And I'm just so thinking about my question that I forget about that part. And I know it's kind of a silly thing, but am I like offending people by not doing that, saying those things? Or is it?
I'm not sure that the thanking is what makes the feedback easier to take. I think it's saying something positive about the paper.
Okay.
That's yeah.
Thank you.
I mean, yes. All right. So let me see what we have next. Okay, performance. Yeah, so some more questions were how to interact with the audience, comment bien gérer son discours lors d'une conférence, quels sont les points sur lesquels il faut se focaliser. So these questions are about, you know, the actual doing of it in real time with an audience and how you can interact with them. So I put down a few things that I suggest that you do that kind of help contact with the audience. And I think that this is also another way to ensure that the feedback you get is going to be constructive, right? So introduce yourself, make eye contact with the audience if you can. It's harder when you're doing it on Zoom, but if you can. Move around the rooms if you can. I mean, I find it really constraining to be stuck at a lectern in front of an audience. I do like to be able to move around and approach the person who is asking me a question, for example. So I think those are important things. Also, and this, you know, it may be more difficult for some people than for others. Don't read your slides. try not to read your slides. Just use the slides as a reminder of what you wanted to say. And move on from there. And the use of cards and reading a text, I don't recommend those either. So you're talking to someone, you're not looking at a text that you have in front of you. And if, I can understand that sometimes, especially when it's not your language, this can be a little bit more difficult. But in order to make contact with the audience, I really would suggest avoiding those things. And then why not? Feel free to ask the audience a question during your presentation. If you would like them to react to something you are presenting, that can be done. So that also enables you to develop a relationship with the audience that can be a little bit more interesting. So those are some of those things. Yeah, and there were a couple of specific performance questions that one was about language, how to deal with that, and one was about presenting a qualitative paper to a quantitative audience, which I have done, by the way, so I can tell you a little bit about that. And so on the first question, I did have a few thoughts, but usually I'm speaking in English to an English audience, so maybe I'm not the best person to answer that, but I do understand how painful it can be when it's not your language. So here are some suggestions with regard to that. So practice with a friendly beforehand, and make sure your slides are all right. So you can't control exactly what you say necessarily during the presentation, but you can get someone to help you make the slides perfect. And so that can be very helpful. Maybe try in smaller formats first. And record yourself so that you can listen to yourself afterwards, after giving the presentation. So you may have to do a little bit more practice than most people would have to. And just let the audience know your concerns about that beforehand, so that this is kind of an accepted thing, and you get some sympathy from the audience around that. So those are my thoughts. I don't know if anyone else has any other suggestions from having been there as well. Anyone? By the way, I did present in French when I was not fluent in French for a while. Yes, Megan.
I'm just I'm so sad when people feel like they'll be judged for their language, and I know some people are, are poop heads about it, but I have such admiration for someone who is not presenting in their mother tongue in such a high stress context. So whenever they make little, slip ups in language, it's like, yeah, I make worse things in my mother tongue. Congrats for it's just full admiration for someone able to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Mark, you wanted to say something as well?
Yeah, personally, I prefer to write the text, especially if it's not in my language. So, for example, in English, it helps me to put the words and make sure that everything, even if when you present you don't read it, but also you could choose some conference where it's more international. If you go to IOM, for example, it might be more American or Canadian English speaker, but in my field, I have some international conference from people from Asia, South America. So then the barrier of the language is kind of, or the stress.
It's shared by everyone. Or, I agree with that. And at EGOS, I've often felt that it was much more, for Quebecois speakers, it kind of seemed the place to be because everyone was speaking in the language that was not their own, and so there's much more. Yeah, it's natural, and everyone has sympathy for it. And it's a shame that we all, we have this one kind of dominant language that everybody has to conform to. And it happens to be easier for some of us than it is for others, and that's unfortunate. Yeah, and I nearly put in this list, write it out, but I really do think that it's not a good idea to read a text, and it does not help you when you do that. So, try to avoid that. Presenting a qualitative paper to a quantitative audience, that happened to me a few times. I don't think there's any way that it can be easy, but you have a good story, so tell the story, get people interested in the story that you're telling, show the richness of the data and how it offers new insights, but be prepared for the following questions. What about the subjectivity of your stuff? You have a small sample. What about the contribution? What about the generalizability? So I think you really have to master, the onto-epistemological assumptions that you are using, and be prepared to explain them, and to be prepared to explain which criteria are applicable to your research. You can do a little bit of an education. It happened to me once that I was into a session and I was presenting my paper on escalating indecision, and the other 3 papers were all co-authored by the same quantitative co-author with 3 of his students. And they were all simulation papers, and about the garbage can model of organizational choice, which is by James March, and they were simulation papers. And it so happened that I quoted the garbage can model of organizational choice in my paper, which was a qualitative paper. So the organizers thought we all belonged together, but this was not the most fun session, and so I didn't have a great time. But this is what I would recommend, and yeah, I would have preferred a different audience. That was the Academy of Management. That got thrown on me after submitting a paper. So that's not perhaps the best experience, but here's how you think about handling it. Show them the data, make them enjoy the presentation, which they probably enjoy much more than listening to each other's presentations. And think about these particular criteria. So I think we're kind of running to the end. And so am I. So I just wanted to add one more thing. I mean, going to a conference is really a very interesting experience. You get to meet all kinds of people. You really need to get into it, and it can be a lot of fun. So don't get terrorized by the thought of having to give a presentation like I did at my first conference, which happened to be in Nashville. I didn't benefit from any of the wonderful things that were available in Nashville because I was so obsessed by my 10-minute presentation. Enjoy the ride, enjoy the journey. So that's it, I'll stop there. And I'm still here, so if there are any other questions, please feel free.
Great. Thank you very much, Anna. Anna, it's really, really interesting, and I'm pretty sure the group enjoyed this this presentation on how to present. We'll a bit past 3:30, but if you have other question for Han, feel free to share it. Otherwise, we see you all at the symposium, and we are so excited to see your presentation skills in person at the Cœur des Sciences. So thank you very much. And if you have any question, comments, Anne is there to answer it. Thank you.
Yeah, good luck everyone with your presentations at conferences and at the symposium, and enjoy it. Thank you for your questions and so on. Yeah.
Bonne fin de semaine.
Bonne fin de semaine.
Super. Bon.
Super.
Ça le mérite
Hi,
d'être sur
hi,
Jeanne.
and I'm sorry, I don't know why it cannot be. Okay, finally. I just have a quick question about exchange, about feedback and asking questions. It takes me years to realize that it is important to learn how to ask questions, how to give feedback.
Right.
I take it for granted for many years, but finally I just realized it's very important. Especially like during last year, I went to Eagles, and one of the professors, during our private talk, he talked with me that some people give feedback just to show their intelligence, just to show they know the literature, right? Some people give feedback just try to say something in front of these big names, right? But some people give really good and sharp feedback. So I'm very curious about, like, in your experience training this so many good students, and some of them are really like sensitive to the like interesting points in the presentation. And then they can give very good feedback, like even in a very short minutes, right? And like for a 3-day conference, it's very tired. Everybody's tired, and we all care about our own presentation. But there's still some people like doing a very good job. They give good feedback. They react to the presentation very fast and in a high quality. So like I'm curious about, in your training to like PhD students, like what suggestion would you give to them, like in terms of this kind of...
I mean, I have a slide. You would send me an email and I have a slide on giving feedback. I have a couple of slides on giving feedback, but the key thing is to be constructive, so and specific and helpful, but also to say what you like as well as what you don't like. So that's important. So that you're talking about the paper, you're not talking about the person.
Yes.
So that's important as well. You're addressing the work, but you're not attacking the person. So that, and you can make suggestions about how they could improve it, rather than saying what's wrong without giving them any help. So so it's like when you write a review of a paper, some people will head each of the sections inadequate conceptual framework, faulty measures, no contribution. Instead of saying that, you could say you need to develop your conceptual framework. Reconsider some of your measures. Enhance your contribution.
Yeah.
So you can turn it into something and offer precise advice about how the person could do that, from where they're coming from, not from where you are, but from what they were trying to do. It's very important, I think, also, and I didn't address that in the presentation, but perhaps I should have. It's to think about where the author is. What were they trying to do, not what you think you would have done in their place. There's nothing worse than getting feedback from someone who says, well, I think you should have taken an entirely different perspective on your paper. This is an institutional logics paper. This is not a corporate social responsibility paper. That's not helpful. That is just undermining the basis of the paper. It's not interesting. So yeah, that's what I would suggest. But I'll send you my slides if you send me an email.
Sure. I will do that. I'm thinking like taking some like Charlotte as an example. My I took Charlotte's class, and I feel like Charlotte is very sensitive to like information, right? I give her like I sent her something, some like a one-page summary of my research, and she gives me some feedback, like a paper that can be published from her mouth. It's different from my writing, and also like some people are really like sensitive to the information, like Charlotte. I'm very curious about how like can this skill be developed, or is like.
Well, I think you can see how someone else does it, and Charlotte is great. I know she's great. I mean,
yeah, it's amazing. She listened to you for 5 minutes. She can give you very good feedback. I'm very impressed. But
use her as a role model. Yeah.
Okay. I'm curious about is this skill can be developed or is something fixed?
I think it can. I think it's a question of culture, really, the culture that you're involved in, you know, how people do that. And some cultures are more kind of competitive and some are more collaborative. And it's collaborative culture creates the possibility of doing that.
Yeah. Maybe it could be the next workshop topic, how to give constructive
yeah, that would be a really interesting, that would be an excellent topic.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I know there's a researcher at GCAM who did a research on feedback in peer review process. And she's
all right.
a human resources professor, so she's really involved into giving feedback to employees.
Yeah,
but she then focus on peer review process and constructive and bad feedback also. So it could be interesting to a workshop to organize for the community, definitely.
Yeah, also seem to review the written feedback and oral feedback. More like this. I heard that you, Mark, you're gonna like you plan to set a award, the best feedback award, but finally it goes or not.
Well, yeah, it's gonna happen. So
nice.
There will be a process. We're gonna explain that, but
that's good.
People could suggest a person that gave him or her interesting feedback during the conference, and there will be a small prize. So that's
an excellent idea.
Yeah.
Best feedback award.
Yeah. Because we did want to focus more on Symposium that is on collaboration and not competition, and so we're trying to récompenser, so award the different people that are going that way. So
good idea.
Good. Thank you so much. It's a very good
presentation. And good luck.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I'll see you, Mark.